Welcome to As a Crow Flies Hiking. This is a continuation video in my series about backpacking with a hammock. This is the fourth video. In the first video, I talked about the hammock that I chose, which was the Walhalla Hammock and Outdoors customized hammock. In the second video, I talked about the JacksRBetter Mount Washington 3 underquilt that I chose. And in the third video, I talked about the TNT tarp 10 by 12 that I chose from Etowah Gear. And this is the last video. I appreciate you tagging along for this. And I essentially want to talk a little bit about some of the hardware that I chose. For me, a lot of the learning curve and the reason why I didn't really get into backpacking with a hammock was, number one, I didn't feel comfortable in the hammock. The hammock that I had was too short, and I've really enjoyed this hammock. It's been absolutely a game changer, a 11-foot hammock. And then secondly, the knots and the hardware. When you look at becoming a tree dweller instead of a ground dweller, one of the things that can stop people is, what do I do about the knots to the tree? What do I do about the knots to the hammock, the underquilt, and the tarp? How does all that work? Well, I wanted to make sure that it was foolproof and easy to set up. I didn't want to have to do a bunch of knots and things. So if that is your issue, you don't like knots and you don't like to have a complicated setup, then maybe this video is for you, because I've tried to make it as simple as I can for myself because I'm not really good at that stuff. Number one, I'll start with the hammock. The first thing that you can see with the hammock is it's a gathered in hammock. So I made sure that I had the Amstel loops. These loops go around the gathered into the hammock and through it. And so it creates basically a continuous loop through there. And you just simply have to have one small knot that goes around the cinch buckles, and then it attaches to the cinch buckle. Secondly, the cinch buckle. That is the next thing that I wanted to get, because I really didn't want to do the loops to the tree. You can, and it's simple to do, it's just not simple for me. So I used a cinch buckle. The cinch buckle simply allows the webbing that's used to go around the tree to attach by gravity against the buckle itself. So this buckle simply pulls against the tree and against the hammock and creates a way to make this simple with the webbing. So you can pull it tight, or you can simply pull the buckle and unloosen it, and then it goes down. Or you can simply allow it to pull on itself and pull it up tight. And that is how you can move the hammock up and down, or make the ridge line more taut or less taut, depending on how you want to set it up. That wasn't the only thing I did. The cinch buckles make it very simple. And then, of course, with the webbing goes around the tree, and then there's a loop that attaches to the tree, but you simply take the loop to a knot around itself. It's sewn together, and through that loop, you take it around the tree, come back through the webbing itself, and then attach to the cinch buckle. Those make attaching the hammock to the tree very simple, and anybody can do it. If I can do it, then anybody can do it. I also had zinget line for the hammock. For the Walhalla hammock, this zinget line gives me a ridge line across the hammock and makes that very simple. And you can know if you've got your hammock too taut or too loose by looking at it with your finger to know what is the angle of the hammock. The zinget line is great for that. I can know exactly where I need it to be. The other two things for the hammock are that it has a ridgeline organizer. As you can see, it goes on the zinget ridgeline, and the organizer simply gives me a couple of pockets that I can put stuff in. I just put it above my head, and that helps me organize when I'm in the hammock. And then lastly, it has number 3 zippers. I wanted there to be a good zipper on the hammock, and those number 3s slide very smoothly and make it very easy. It either has pull ties around the zipper so I can get in and out. And those pull ties are different colors, so I know which end's the head and which end's the foot, and I can pull them apart, get in and out of the hammock. So those were things that for the hardware for the hammock that I thought would work very well. Now, moving on to the hardware for the underquilt. JacksRBetter does an incredible job with their hardware for the underquilt. In fact, their cinch suspension on their underquilt is probably the best I've ever seen. It's so simple, but as you can see, these mini carabiners attach to the underquilt, and that it also has these cinch buckles that cinch up the underquilt so that you can have it tight, or you can have it loose depending on where you need it to be, so that you don't get any draft, or that you don't get it too tight that it cinches up the loft in the hammock. But here's how they do the suspension system, which is really innovative. essentially all you do is take these carabiners off, and I do 2 girth hitches around the hammock. This is all it is, an elastic cord with 2 mini carabiners around each side. You take these, you hold them in the middle of the loop, and you put it over the hammock. And then you take it through the loop, the 2 mini carabiners, and there you have the girth hitch. You throw it back over and do another girth hitch down below, and that creates 2 girth hitches that will give you what you need to pull out the underquilt. That is how you attach the underquilt, and that works perfectly. You don't even need an elastic throughout the middle of the underquilt because your body does what it needs to do to pull it down. These little cinch buckles here are great for the hammock, and that works great for the suspension. That's essentially what I have for the hardware for the underquilt. Lastly, let's talk about the hardware that I have for the tarp, which was one of my hardest things to get through to figure out how I wanted to do the tarp with the hardware. The first thing that I'll talk about with the hardware for the tarp that I got from Etowah Gear is these Light Outdoors tensioners. They're kind of like a Line Lock 3. They're almost the same, but they simply have pressure on itself that pulls it tight, or you can pull it up and loosen the tarp with these tensioners. I simply did like a small overhand knot around the loop, the webbing, and then attach it through the middle of the tensioner, and then did a taut line hitch and a bow line for the middle parts of the tarp, and then a bow line for the bottom around, and I keep the bow line in the bottom next to the stake. So that makes it real simple that these tensioners are already here, they're already on the tarp, and that's all I have to do to set up the tarp with the tie outs. Now let me say a little bit about how I do the ridge line for my tarp. I have a wasp from Dutchware. These wasps are incredible, they're so easy. They also have stingers and other different hardware that you can use for your ridge line. I really like the wasps. I used those years ago and really kept them. I simply took a key ring and attached it to the loop, and then take the wasp and attach it through the key ring. This is really simple. I take a 1.8 millimeter line and put a bow line at the one end, and then wrap it through itself around the tree, and then you can wrap this wasp around itself and make the tension that you need for the ridge line, and it's very simple. And so that's how I've done my ridge line. I think this will work great. I could do a continuous ridge line across, and I think Hammock Gear has one of those and Dutchware has one of those, but I decided I didn't really want that whole line to go across 12, 13, 14 feet. I simply wanted each end to have a tie out point around the tree like I do the straps for the hammock, and this works perfect. In fact, the ridge line, you can see it's very taut, and I think it will work great for my hammock setup. Well, thank you guys for watching this episode of As the Crow Flies Hiking, and basically the end of my series on backpacking with a hammock. I've shown you the hammock, I've shown you the underquilt, I've shown you the tarp, and I've shown you all the accessories. I haven't really shown you my top quilt, but that's essentially going to be the quilts that I already have, depending on the temperature. Obviously, I have my own preferences. Just because I called it the best hammock setup only means it's best for me. You do whatever you want to do. I've simply given you some options here, but I would ask you, please comment below, what would you do differently? You know, I'm not an expert on hammock camping, so I would love to hear your comments and have a discussion about what you would do differently with the tarp, with the hammock, the underquilt, or especially the accessories and the hardware. Appreciate you again for watching this episode, and I will see you on the next adventure.